Go ahead.
Today we're going to talk about the corporate usage of personal data. In 2014, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission inspected 9 data broker agencies and found out that they had collected huge amounts of information without consumer knowledge. Currently in the U.S., the federal government does not enforce any specific laws pertaining to data usage among corporations. As internet dependency is growing, online shopping and transactions are becoming more and more popular, giving more access to personal information online. However, Harvard professors have noted multiple data breaches in recent years, and Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg was recently made to testify in court after improperly sharing millions of Facebook user data. Considering these recent events, our research question is, should the U.S. government regulate corporate usage of personal data?
So our first plausible solution is that should the U.S. government regulate corporate terms of service? And our second solution is that the U.S. government should fully adopt the European Union's GDPR. And our third and final solution is that the U.S. government should pursue its current regulations. And we decided to go with the first solution.
The current laws are enforced at either the federal or the state level. At the federal level, the Federal Trade Commission Act ensures that the Federal Trade Commission, a government agency, has some sort of data protection regulation. However, in California, the Consumer Privacy Act gives residents several data privacy rights, such as the right to be informed about what data is being used and why. Because the state and federal laws differ significantly, we decided to focus on the federal regulation to ensure that both federal and state governments have similar legislation. The Fourth Amendment gives U.S. citizens the right to privacy in their homes and property, which naturally applies to their personal data as well. However, because companies like Google and Facebook are wrongfully using and collecting personal data, the need for strict regulation is urgent. Google collects data ranging from one's marital status to location. And while these data collections seem unnecessary, what most people don't know is that Google supports illicit companies like Backpage by blocking legislation from being passed against such companies. Backpage is a company that has a deep history of sex trafficking, especially of children. And if Google supports companies like Backpage, there is a likelihood that Google shares personal data with such companies. This likelihood creates an urgent need for strict regulation. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation has become the strictest regulation because of its international scope and overall protection for citizens. The GDPR gives citizens 6 basic rights, and these rights include the right to consent data use, erase data, and data portability. The GDPR also applies to every technology company that interacts with any European citizen. The pro of the GDPR is that it completely ensures that EU citizens have complete security and protection when it comes to corporate personal data use. The con is that companies have to spend a lot more money and resources in following the GDPR. This chart is from a survey conducted by a Dutch research facility to estimate the impact of the GDPR on businesses. As seen in this chart, more than half of the participants anticipated an increase in overall workload and an increase in cost in training employees on new security standards. Because the GDPR complicates business practices and costs businesses a lot more, the full GDPR should not be adopted by the U.S. federal government.
So, economically, as you can see by the graph on the left, there's a clear 40% jump in cost between 2011 and 2017 for GDPR-compliant companies. However, as you can see by the graph on the right, companies who did not comply with GDPR regulations spent 50% more in 2017 than they did in 2011. Also, in 2011 alone, they spent 3 times as much as the companies who did comply with GDPR regulations. So, as previously stated, GDPR regulations do have their problems. However, this does help illustrate how regulations in general can help the U.S. economy. So, to implement this, you would have continued marketing efficiency. What this means is a higher data transparency, which allows customers to have more knowledge on where the data is going and therefore use a service more frequently. Also, you'd have an increase in the amount of workers for the company. This is a limitation because that means the company has to pay more. However, because of the 3 times reduction in cost just by following regulations, this is far outweighed. And because of the increased employment, this can actually help society due to more job positions. So, if people dislike the way their information is shared, purchase interest drops, according to an article by Harvard Business Review. Clearly stated, if people do not know or trust where their information is going, they are less likely to purchase a product, which would basically mean that they lose a potential service and companies lose potential money. However, as you can see by the graph on the left, there is The companies spend twice as much on advertisements in 2017 as they do in 2012. However, they also generate $22 billion per year, and that is a 54% profit margin. And what this also means is that by limiting data sharing, we would actually be limiting the data that supplies these targeted ads and potentially limiting such a huge amount of income for companies.
Data appropriation is the use of data without user consent. An example of this was the Facebook scandal. As Zuckerberg described in his testimony, a large amount of data was accessed through a personality test for 87 million Facebook users. The information was then processed and converted into a system that could profile US voters based on and target them with personal political ads during the 2016 presidential election. With regulation on data sharing and safety evaluations, incidents like these will no longer occur, keeping consumers' information safe and secure. New medical and health technologies are threatening the privacy of patients and the HIPAA privacy laws. The expansion of medical records to the digital world has drawn attention to the increased access to personal health information as well as fears of data theft. This includes the use of biometric technology, which uses a person's DNA, fingerprints, and iris recognition in order to establish identification. Technological advancement as a result of regulation involves more secure technology. If the US were to implement corporate terms of service, technologies would soon offer advanced encryption. Automated breach alerts would help minimize the time taken for issues to be identified, addressed, and reported. Technological limitations of adopting our solution include losing the ability to benefit the public as effectively. Without regulation, data from social media regarding likes, tweets, updates, and search data can help humanitarian organizations to better understand demographic trends and public sentiment. This can be especially helpful in the event of a natural disaster when data sharing can be shared with organizations like the Red Cross and UNICEF. As for technological advancement, data sharing has the potential to transform practice, substance, and technological studies. It can advance methodology and data curation practice as well as provide professional development opportunities. Data sharing can also make scientific research much more democratic and practically relevant by making data and research findings available to scholars and the broader public without access to funding and research materials.
With the current legal framework, corporations are able to share information to third parties without many complicated barriers. Many of you may have come across pop-up browsers referring to cookies. What these cookies really do is they allow a website to track a person's browsing activity. Similarly, loyalty and rebate cards are often used by shopping businesses to provide incentives for their customers. However, signing up for such cards often means giving out huge amounts of information that can then be sold to others without your knowledge. All of these aspects collectively contribute to a newly coined term known as social sorting, where companies were able to identify and rank individuals based on their financial situation, which can then be used to hold certain biases against groups of people, which can then take away from their opportunities. Not only this, but social media information is sometimes used for political persuasion. In the 2016 presidential campaign, Facebook posts portrayed Hillary Clinton as a racist targeting African Americans and young women, which obviously undermined her personality. Basically, if we were to pursue the current regulations in America, we would be giving in to a society where individuals are easy to be manipulated. On the other hand, going about our chosen solution, which is to allow the US government to regulate corporate terms of service, would mean that individuals are forced to pay more attention to terms of service and hence know where their information is going, which will then help with their confidence level in terms of their safety. However, the biggest implication is that social sorting can be prevented. This would mean that that companies would no longer have the ability to rank an individual based on their financial situation, which can then save their freedom. All in all, going about our chosen solution will be in the best interest of the people, especially in terms of their safety.
In conclusion, the government should regulate corporate terms of service. For one thing, if the solution is implemented, scandals like the Facebook one will be significantly reduced. It will prevent unnecessary social sorting, increase customer awareness and confidence of where their data is going, as well as continue marketing efficiency.
Okay. Sarah, how did the group decide to include Sava's perspective into the overall presentation?
Well, Sava's perspective really focused on the political aspect, which is extremely important, as you can tell by her reference to Google and Backpage. And what this really helps illustrate is, well, as you saw by her first slide, it really helps illustrate how there's a huge limitation to actually giving, not to our solution, but to what's against our solution, which is allowing data regulations to be within the company themselves. So it really does help support our solution, and we ended up using it very effectively.
Okay, Saba, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to exclude from the team presentation?
So in Sarum's IRR, there was an argument about data brokers, which are basically companies that share data without the users or like the people's consent. And we decided to exclude this because data brokers aren't really a big part of the industry, so it didn't really affect our solution or the research question as much.
Sanjana, reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem your group identified?
So in Anika's lens, she talked about social sorting, which basically highlights the fact that consumers can be manipulated by companies into sorting themselves into different financial categories, and this can affect they won't have as many opportunities for financial aid or things like that, and that really helped me to understand the fact that data regulation really needs to be put into place in order for this to be changed in the future.
And last but certainly not least, Anika, what is the strongest counter-argument to the solution your team identified?
So in Sauer's economic lens, there was this one point on how companies were able to generate about $22 billion per year just through ads, and obviously with our solution and tighter regulations, this may be not completely taken away, but perhaps limited, and hence companies may not be able to make as much money anymore. And yeah, that's the biggest counter-argument.
Okay, thank you.